Hello, welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Normally, what I do in these videos is give a glimpse into what Sunday morning is like here. And by that, I mean I take a little bit of the music that we will hear or have heard, and the reading for that particular Sunday that I'll be preaching on, and then use use it to repeat the sermon. Um, I don't know whether I should say repeat since I haven't preached it yet. This is done midweek. Um, Preview the sermon, pre preach the sermon. There's got to be a word for it somewhere. I don't know what it is. This week, I want to do things a little bit differently because the sermon that I've got in mind is very interactive. It has some stuff in it where I will need to be able to tell whether people are paying attention or not. Um, and that's not to say people don't pay attention to the sermon, but there's going to be some give and take necessary for it. And that is not unusual in any preaching situation. We have this idea that it's only in the black church that there is a call and response, an amen, and a preach it, and a help him Jesus kind of experience. There is in other situations too. It's just that you have to have an ear attuned to it or an eye that can see what is going on. Um, there's always a lot going on in any church during the sermon and at other times. And once you become aware of it, it can be a wonderful experience of searching together for the word of the Lord for the people gathered there, to us and for us, and a word for the world that we are charged and privileged both to live out and to carry beyond the walls, beyond that particular sanctuary. Um, and all of that is good. But because this week it's going to be a lot more of that give and take, a lot more explicitly, um, I'm going to do a completely different kind of thing here on this video. And Sunday morning includes Christian education, Sunday school. I'm in the room right now where I teach the confirmation class, the seventh and eighth graders. This is material that would have gone into another sermon or that I might use if I were teaching an adult class. We have an adult class that is very good and a wonderful group. And if you're close enough to get here, I hope you will. They're very welcoming and warm. In fact, just to make the Sunday school experience a little bit more real, um, I brought my coffee and I have some Girl Scout cookies here. Actually, I have a Girl Scout cookie because while I was setting things up, I ate the rest of them. Um, Wherever you are, if you're watching this on Sunday morning and you're further away, pour yourself a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, some milk, grab a cookie, a donut, um, settle in. But be ready to be involved because there are things that I'm going to ask you to do in the course of this that um, I'm not good at doing on a video, but learning, just like a sermon, is a give and a take. And for someone to learn, as well as for someone to teach, involves effort. It's not a passive experience, at least not when it's done with a full sense of engagement. So, we are going to be talking today a little bit about the transfiguration of Jesus. That's the reading that's usually appointed for the last Sunday before Lent, which begins this coming week on Wednesday, Ash Wednesday. Uh, this year, that's also Valentine's Day, but that's another story. Um, so, obviously, you're watching this on a phone or a computer. So, before we get started, put this on pause. Don't sign off, but put it on pause. And go and do some searching for artwork of the Transfiguration and look at some of the great paintings that you will see and how they picture it. Look for paintings that come from a variety of styles. Obviously, there's one by El Greco, which is absolutely terrific. There are some that will be kind of sappy, cartoonish. There will be some really good abstract ones too. Uh, the Transfiguration involves a lot of shadowy figures and a lot of strange goings on. And that has given people license to depict the scene as it might have touched the people. Well, go look and see what you see. And after you do, come back and I will read what the Gospel of Mark talks about. And then we'll look at some background and then we'll draw some conclusions. All right? Go Google or go surf the net for a while. When you come back, I'll still be here. All right, welcome back. Here is what we'll be hearing in church. This is from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings for you, one for Moses and one for Elijah." I've misread that a little bit, which is what happens when you're reading aloud in person. Should have said, "Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. I'm going to stop there for now. Um, and I only read through verse 8. Yes, I know. If you were reading along, and I hope you were, you would have noticed that. Transfiguration. What does it mean to be transfigured or to see something transfigured? Um, One of the most unusual stage directions in English literature and plays is in My Fair Lady by George Bernard Shaw. And it's the thing that turned into, I'm saying it's My Fair Lady, it's Pygmalion is the play. It was turned into the musical My Fair Lady. Uh, by the way, at the end, My Fair Lady changes the ending that Shaw wrote. And there's a lot of iffiness about that, but that's not what I'm dealing with. The stage direction that takes place at one point is for Liza Doolittle, and it says her face becomes transfigured. Now, I'm not an actor, and I don't know how someone on a stage would suddenly say, okay, I will transfigure at this point. But that's what it calls for her to do. The second greatest stage direction is in Shakespeare, and that I could do. In fact, I would do, and it is Exit pursued by a bear. Again, another story, but we know how to run from things, but how do you stay there and be transfigured? Transfiguration is something that happens to someone or something. Um, you are watching the sun go down, and then all of a sudden, the colors jump out at you in the space of 5 or 6 seconds, or even less, and the sky has been transfigured. Um, Someone is sitting beside the bed of a loved one who's in a coma, and they move or they make a sound, and the person who's been sitting with them for days gets this look on their face, and they're transfigured by surprise, by happiness, by a sense of awe sometimes, by a sense of excitement. They're changed. And there's something about what happens when someone has a moment where something breaks through to them, where they suddenly realize that they are forgiven, that they are loved, that they are made whole, that God is not out to get them, but God is out to get them, to help them. And people are transfigured. That is a beautiful moment. There are many transfiguring moments. The transfiguration of Jesus was a moment when the disciples who were with him saw a change in him. They saw something that they had not seen before, but that had been there all the time. We'll use the word glory for it. They saw that Jesus was not just an impressive human being, and by impressive, I mean really impressive, but far more than that. And that something was going on through him that was absolutely grander and broader and deeper than they ever would have suspected. This was no ordinary, extraordinary person. This was somebody that really had something deep within him that they were privileged at that point to see. Something so incredible that it kind of knocked them to the ground. And they didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know how to handle it. And it was the presence of God in Jesus that was making this difference. Now, hold on to that for a second, and we're going to go and look at what else was going on. They saw him talking with two other people. And those were two significant people, Moses and Elijah. They represent a lot of different things. Traditionally, we talk about them representing the law and the prophets, bearing witness to him, bearing witness to the faith. The law being given through Moses as a series of commandments to the people of Israel that would help them to become holy unto the Lord, to use the King James language. A holy people, a people set aside, a people who had a relationship, a covenant that God had established with them, but not just with them, not just for them, but with them for the sake of the whole world. The prophets on the other side, represented by Elijah, the prophets being the people who would call Israel back to that purpose over and over and over again whenever they wandered away from it. And the people who would re-proclaim, if you will, God's love for the people, even when there was a failure in the relationship. Always coming from our side, never from God's side. But nevertheless, that would put a strain on that relationship. Prophets, Elijah, of course, we'll come back to him, but other prophets like Micah and Amos, people who looked and said, God isn't happy with us at this point. And then prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, who would look and say, okay, if things have fallen apart because we've messed up our relationship to God somehow, that doesn't mean God's not going to help us out of the mess that we have created. People who would hold out hope for life. And sometimes people expected that would mean life as they had known it before the disasters that came upon them, but turned out to be life despite the disasters that had come upon them. And an ability to rebuild with God's help. And to, here's the phrase, build back better. To do it with a kind of humility built into it that says, okay, we have learned our lesson. But there were many prophets who came, and generation after generation, it was always necessary to relearn these things. And sometimes they were relearned the hard way. So here is Jesus being transfigured, and the disciples with him looked up and they saw two people, the law and the prophets. But among them, two people who had experienced a direct moment of being with the Lord, being with God, up on top of a mountain. In their case, the same mountain. For Moses, up there with God, with being given the commandments, with flashes of fire. This is how it's described in Exodus. And this is Exodus 24:15 and following. Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moses out of the cloud. Now, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And so here's Moses experiencing God in great grandeur and in awe. And they speak back and forth with one another. And Moses does more listening than speaking, but you can see a relationship established between them, one of a little bit of give and take. Then there's Elijah, who, at a low point in his life, runs away from some stuff that he's afraid of going on in Israel. You can read about it in First Kings. And in First Kings 19, we read at verse 9 this. At that place, which was Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, the same mountain Moses had been on, at that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it away." He, meaning God, said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by," as he had with Moses. Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord wasn't in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets, and now they are seeking my life to take it away. I alone am left." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You shall also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill, and whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Again, there's a lot in that. But the point is that up there on the mountain, talking with Jesus, are people who have encountered God directly in moments of awe and grandeur and spectacular things. And then somebody else who thought he would do the same, but in all the fire and the earthquakes and all of that, he didn't encounter God. He encountered God in silence and in stillness. And then there are the disciples, and they are encountering God in Jesus. There are people like that everywhere you turn. There are some people who will see God in the big things, in the movements of history, in the things that you see in the news, in the major events of their life. Things like the birth of a child, which is dramatic and wonderful and transfigurative, in the loss of a loved one, which is dramatic and sad and transfigurative, but God is still there. There are people who think that they will experience God and have to experience God in these big things, but instead, God sneaks up on them, not in the big things, but in the small things, in the regular patterns of life, in the dependability of the seasons, in um, a good meal, in the love that they are able to share. That's that Valentine's Day thing coming in here. In being part of the life of their community, in their work, in a good poem, in a novel that speaks to them. God finds ways to do that. And then the disciples, present in all of that, seeing Jesus, especially, being transfigured in front of them, and Jesus calling them, particularly them, and saying, hey, I want you in this moment to see this, to be part of it. I need you as my friends to know about how God reaches out to human beings and to you. And it's frightening for them. But at the same time, it's a tremendous privilege. The last verse of the Battle Hymn of the Republic kind of takes a lot of that together. We think of it as a patriotic song, but it's a religious song primarily. But it talks about how God was acting in the lives of all the people who were involved in trying to bring an end to slavery. Not just the soldiers, but the people on the home front too. And the words say, in the beauty of the lily, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make man holy, let us die to make men free, for God is marching on. What we see in the transfiguration of Christ is the beginning of the transfiguration of all people who draw near to God, whether in the spectacular ways like Moses, in the quieter ways like Elijah, who also was involved in some pretty spectacular stuff. But God reaches out in all these ways. And whatever is going on, God is there and can transfigure us and situations. There's a lot more to this. There's so many things that could go into a sermon like that. So much to be seen in that. That's going to end the Bible study for this week. But I pray it doesn't end the experience of transfiguration for all of us, one way or another. And my prayer is simply that we all experience and meet God directly and in life-changing ways, because it's all for the good. Amen.